started. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Moving the Connectivity Needle in North Idaho, Building Broadband Infrastructure, Networks, and Business Plans. This is our 6th and final webinar in the Moving the Needle on Connectivity in North Idaho webinar series. My name is Angie Edwards-Kuski. I'm a Community Development Specialist with Clearwater Economic Development Association, serving the 5 counties of North Central Idaho. And today's a little bit special. We also actually have some great guests joining us. So I'm going to give them a few moments to introduce themselves and their role in what they're doing with broadband also here in just a second. Let me swap slides here. But as you can see, we are at the end of our webinar series. This has been such a fantastic experience for all of us. The goal of us coming into the series was to increase the knowledge and capacity of North Idaho communities on broadband. For those of you who have been participating, whether it's been just for a couple of them or for the whole series, we hope that you're going to walk away with a better understanding of broadband and your individual as well as our collective role in shaping the future of broadband in North Idaho. We've always just said that our goal here is to provide technical assistance, not talking head webinars. Our goal overall is to partner with everybody who is participating to attract investment to our region and to improve broadband connectivity across the 10 counties of North and North Central Idaho. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the mic over to Ms. Laura Arvin of the Delta Interfaith, and she's going to tell us a little bit about their group and how they have been doing something similar.
Thank you, Angie. Appreciate it. Yes, there's several of us from Delta Interfaith on. Delta Interfaith is a coalition of congregations. We work across race, socioeconomic, and religious divides to build relationships and foster leadership skills and achieve change on issues affecting the health and well-being of folks in East Carroll Parish, Louisiana, very northeast corner. So in the interest of time, I don't want to take over the webinar, but we're excited to be with our friends Don and Scott. They've been helping us with technical assistance as well here, and we're moving right along. It never seems fast enough, but we've been talking with stakeholders as well and talking with ISPs and other providers. I want to welcome, I'll name the folks that are on, and maybe they can, if they're able to, turn on their camera and wave. Linda Milliken, Lucinda Bland, Wanda Manning, and Leatrice Hawkins are from Delta Interfaith. And I'd also like to welcome Catherine Oswald. She is a business owner here in East Carroll Parish and is looking to expand, has some exciting ideas about economic development here in East Carroll Parish. So I hope Catherine was willing to come on and be part of our group today.
Hi, I'm here.
Hey, Catherine. Okay, so we'll turn it back to you, Angie. Thank you for having us, letting us sneak in on this. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you all for joining us, and we're so excited to see what you're doing, and hopefully even after this ends, we'll continue to connect with you guys and cheer each other on as we move towards our goals. Okay, so let's see. So this workshop series is presented as part of the Rev Up North Idaho program. The Rev Up North Idaho is funded through the USDA's Rural Community Development Initiative, the Avista Fund at Innovia, and local membership dollars from both PAC and CETA membership. So we certainly want to take a moment here in our last one to thank everybody who has provided the support and funding for this webinar. Okay. All right, actually, I'm going to swap it back here for a second, and I'm going to turn it over now to my co-host, Doreen Combrick of the Panhandle Area Council.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Angie, as always. Welcome to our final webinar in the Moving the Connectivity Needle series. It's kind of hard to believe that this is where we're at, but here we are. We've been through a lot and we've learned a lot. I'm Doreen Combrick, and I'm the Community Development Specialist with Panhandle Area Council, serving the 5 northern counties of Idaho. And we want to thank all of the attendees that have been to our webinar series and our regional technical assistance sessions as well. for being a part of this project, and most importantly, for learning alongside of us. It's truly been an education, starting with Broadband 101, going all the way through the basics of business plans and how to use data to develop your plans, federal resources and local support, and then with last month's broadband adoption and digital inclusion session. But today we have Don Williams and Scott Woods back from NTIA's Broadband USA to take us deeper into the nuts and bolts of the broadband business models and business plans. We're really glad to have them both presenting again today for our final session. There's going to be a lot of information presented today, but keep in mind, we're going to record the session as always, and you can revisit it whenever you need to. And you can always reach out to us or to Broadband USA with your questions going forward. So with that, I would like to introduce Mr. Scott Woods. Scott is a senior communications program specialist with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration Broadband USA initiative. He is the principal liaison between the Broadband USA program office and key strategic partners and external stakeholder groups, including representatives from state and local governments, telecommunications companies, and nonprofits, and colleges and universities. Prior to his Broadband USA management responsibilities, he managed numerous broadband network projects within the VTOP Comprehensive Community Infrastructure portfolio, including projects in California, Arizona, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, West Virginia, Arkansas, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. His portfolio of projects includes complex, high-profile, and high-risk broadband infrastructure deployment and construction projects with a total value of over $750 million. Prior to being at NTIA, he served as an associate attorney in the Telecommunications Media and Technology Group at Brigham McCutcheon LLP in Washington, D.C., and he holds a Bachelor of Arts from Morehouse College, a Master of Arts in Public Policy from American University, and a Juris Doctor from Howard University School of Law. Thank you for being here again, Scott. We're so excited to listen to you speak today.
Thank you, Dorian, and thank you, Angie. CETA and PAC have been great partners. I also would like to welcome our friends at Delta Interfaith. Again, thank you, CETA and PAC, for extending the invitation. We started this, our Broadband USA workshops with our friends in Louisiana, and we're really gracious and happy that they're able to join us for this last series. We're at the last one. I can't believe it, of our broadband business plans. As you all know about Don Williams, just is a fabulous community-based partner, has a wealth of knowledge and information as he's worked with numerous communities across the country, not only within Broadband USA and NTIA, but prior to, as he was a consultant in this industry for a number of years.
From where?
So I just wanted to come on and just say thank you. You all have been excellent partners, both for the CETA and PAC, as well as Delta Interfaith. And we look forward to extending our partnership beyond just this workshop. So, again, I ask you right now, Mr. There we go. We're on mute. That's okay. It's part of it. It happens, right? My dog is going to jump here soon. My kids are going to run in. It's okay. But again, we're really excited about what comes next. I just want you all to know that this is not the last time that you'll hear from us. We are engaged. We are determined to be a community partner for both CETA, PAC, and Delta Interfaith. And so as we kick off this last series, I just want to put some framework on what our intentions are today. So again, we're focusing on sort of the business aspect of it. So whether the community decides to go on its own, if your state laws allow for municipal ownership, or if you're working with a local service provider or enticing a new service provider to come in your community to build or expand infrastructure, it's important to understand the business aspect of it. And so Don Williams is going to walk you through. I'm going to chime in as well. And we're just going to present, and this is some dense subject matter. So again, the slides will be given to you as reference. Sit back, relax, take it all in, ask questions. But again, we're just presenting to you a different model, if you will, of how to look at broadband infrastructure, digital inclusion, and access, right? The communities, oftentimes we focus on getting the infrastructure in and getting our target and vulnerable communities served, but we also have to start thinking about the business aspect of it, sustainability, right? And if I'm working with my local service provider, they have to make money. That's their ultimate goal. At the end of the day, this is a business. And so Don is going to we're going to talk you through some of the issues that are commonplace in developing network and business plans. So without further ado, I just want to say thank you very much. It has been our pleasure to be with and work with both communities. And we hope that you sit back and enjoy the material. So with that said, I'm going to kick it over to Dorian, if you're going to do something for Don, or I'll kick it right to Don Williams.
Well, sure, we have to brag on Don here since all of you have such impressive bios. Okay, so Don Williams is the Senior Broadband Specialist for NTIA's Broadband USA program. In this capacity, he provides technical assistance to local and state governments on broadband deployment, economic development, and closing the digital divide. He also answers about 40 emails a day from CETA and PAC. Prior to this position, he served as a senior program officer for the Broadband Technologies Opportunity Program, or the BTOP program. As part of the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, NTIA is responsible for implementing a $4.4 billion grant program to deploy broadband infrastructure in the United States. Prior to post-awards, Dr. Williams evaluated grant proposals and pre-award and provided support to NTIA in monitoring 11 large telecommunications infrastructure grants in the South and in the Northwest. In addition, he also leads wage and benefits conformance requests and compliance regarding Davis-Bacon and related acts for the entire BTOP program. So Don, share your wonderful expertise with us.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. It's good to be back with everybody in Idaho, and definitely want to welcome our friends from Louisiana as well. And thanks everybody in Idaho for being so gracious during these presentations. I'm almost sorry this is our last formal presentation, but then we'll be moving into more one-on-one technical assistance work, and quite looking forward to that as well. Okay, well, let's start this out. So as Scott said, we're going to be talking about primarily business plans and different ways to think about business plans, different organizational models that are going to come about. And we want to get very detailed towards the end. It does get a little weedy at times, but business plans often get that way. Next slide, please. Great. So building a business plan, we have a number of key aspects for the network planning. One is what's available in the current marketplace. And by that, we want to ask, is the marketplace in my community primarily institutions, businesses, residential, all of the above? We also want to understand, what do users and our customers need? And we don't really want to assume that we know what they need. That's probably not a great approach. It's better to do some research. We're going to talk about research projects and what can be done. You have to do the research. And then we want to make certain that when we know what our potential customers, client base, community wants, we want to make certain that we're constructing a network that is appropriate to meeting not only the current needs of that community, but as far as possible, the future needs of that community as well. And those are all parts of a good business plan. So some of the critical components of a successful business plan, I've put together quite a few over time, is an overview of the project, its objectives, what the network build is going to be, what your marketing schemes are going to be, how are you going to contract or not contract for maintenance and repair, as well as very detailed financial information. We're going to get into that. And importantly, the implementation strategy for the build. It is vital that when the initial build is beginning, that the first rollout go well. And we want to talk about some of that. And we also, throughout this, want to talk about the role of partners and different partners and how they can be important to developing a successful business plan going forward. Next slide, please. So we have 5 key steps. We're in the federal government, so we always have a certain number of steps, and this one is 5. Each one of these is going to have a variety of work attributes to it. And each one of them does take some time to do. And many of them are going to be, you'll think you'll get done the marketing ideas, but then in the next stage you'll go, well, you know, we maybe want to rethink some of those marketing ideas. So firstly, we want to make decisions about the network project based on your planning roadmap, which should provide you with a great deal of information towards developing your business plan, and your partnership assessment. One of the previous sessions, we did talk in good detail about public-private partnerships and whether they were led by the public sector or the private sector or somewhere in between. So the knowledge of that is also going to be key for your business planning. And we want to determine the demand for service offerings. Is it going to be internet only? Is it going to be some sort of triple play? That is, you know, the more traditional cable operator approach. You provide programming services, voice over IP, as well as internet connectivity. Or is it just going to be internet connectivity? And those are important decisions going forward. As you all know, there's cord cutting, and people are beginning to sign up for just the internet, and then they purchase programs from that. Secondly, we want to know the operational marketing requirements for each type of network. Each type of network is going to have different requirements for marketing, implementation, stakeholder outreach. And we've talked a lot about stakeholder outreach and different types of networks in the past. And we're going to see how some of that comes to bear on your business plans. And step 5, which is fundamentally important, is to develop good funding and financial projections. If you have good financial projections, the opportunity for your funding increases dramatically. One of the first things that folks realize is, for a loan, whether it's from a government, a bank, a venture capital firm, the one thing that's going to be looked at right away is, are your projections realistic? Are the assumptions realistic? And is there enough detail to make them comfortable with granting you money or lending you money going forward? Next slide, please. Okay, we have this questioning slide, which I always like. And so anyways, when you work through these 5 steps, 5 questions you have to think about all the time. What are the community's objectives? And that's a question that just goes all through the business planning. Similarly, with the targeted customer base, you know, as you begin to look more at your business planning and you get into very serious network design, not desktop, but real network design, sometimes your targeted customer base is going to alter a bit because you have more information, more details. What is your customer demand? Again, it's not a good idea to assume what the penetration rate is. That is, it's not a good idea to say, well, I know we're going to get 75%. And when somebody asks you, well, how do you know that? You say, well, I'm pretty sure. It has to be based on some sort of survey and analysis of that. And then what are the operational requirements? Different communities are going to have different skill sets in terms of whether operations and staffing is done internally, whether people have to be hired, or what can be contracted out. We're going to talk a bit about that, just as we did in public-private partnerships. What you do internally and what you contract out is vital to going forward with these business plans. And importantly, how can you meet the long-term sustainability of your network? Remember, the goal of the network is to have cash flow positives and to get as many folks, institutions, nonprofits on the network as possible. We want the network to have as close to maximum penetration as possible. That's going to help the network's longevity going forward, and it's going to allow the network to expand when it needs to. It's going to allow the network to provide extra customer service equipment when that equipment needs to be replaced. Next slide, please.
Hey, Don, let me chime in here real quick. I would just want to add to as well. These aren't sort of new requirements. So if you recall, as you go through the planning process, as you meet with your stakeholders, you're gathering this information that then is going to tell you a lot about your customer base, even if it's segmented. So you'll know about your residences. You'll know about what the business community needs. You'll know about your medicine from the telehealth and telemedicine and your hospital provider. So this work all builds upon the work that you're already doing or the work that you've already done in the planning process. So this is just how you gather all of that information and then begin to reflect that in a formal business plan or a formal business document as you work with your local service provider or decide to do something on your own. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. So the biggest questions are these ones on this current slide we have. New construction. So if you are working with your local provider, one of the questions has to be, are we thinking of expanding an existing network to serve areas that are not currently served? Are we thinking about building a new network? Or if it's a current provider and it's a hybrid coax fiber system, does that need to be simply upgraded with new electronic equipment? Or does it have to be rebuilt with fiber extensions going further into neighborhoods, or indeed fiber to the premise? Potential benefits. We want to make certain that the benefits that are going to be attributed to the network are the benefits that the community needs to resolve the gap between what they have and what they need going forward. And remember, we want it to be as future-proof as possible. That means generally, we're going to want the network to be as new as possible and to have extra fiber strands and to be on a solid financial footing going forward. Similarly, are there any current problems that the network needs to be particularly aware of? For example, if there is in the community a well-known, well-founded homework gap, we want to make sure that that network fulfills the problems of the homework gap, just as we would for telemedicine issues. And as we've gone over many times, while these are all important for urban and suburban and rural areas, they are vitally important for rural areas. And the COVID crisis has really brought those things to the fore. Similarly, for your customer base, are we thinking about institutions only in terms of an iNet? Are we thinking about an iNet that's designed so that it can be expanded to go residential in the future? A residential network. These are questions that are going to be vital in terms of the next one, which is what are your service offerings? And we talked a little bit about that. Partners, we want to make certain that any partner brings skill sets that we do not have as a public entity, or if you're a private entity, what do we need from that public partner to make this work smoothly? And finally, and most importantly, and remember, something you should be thinking about at the very beginning, funding. Funding's vital to the planning process, and funding can take, as we've mentioned, a variety of forms. We're going to talk about some of those today, but you have local sources of funding through bond issuances, targeted investment districts, business investment districts, grant money For example, from the state of Idaho has a number of grants out there that seem more oriented to public-private partnerships, or federal grants. Federal grants can run the gamut from serving primarily businesses with EDA funding, or serving last mile with USDA funding, and now some more funding from NTIA. Next slide, please. Great. So we talked about a little bit of networks. We're going to talk a little bit about some of these important differences. So institutional networks. There are literally, I don't know how many, probably a few thousand publicly owned institutional networks in the country. These are networks that are built by city and county governments, and they serve their own buildings, their remote facilities, their main campus, often public safety as well, sometimes hospitals, sometimes the school system is on the network. These are networks that are not selling retail services to residents. I do want to point out, however, that a number of publicly owned systems that now provide residential connectivity started out as institutional networks. And I believe that includes one of your communities in Idaho, Ammon. I believe that started out as an institutional network. Middle mile network. So remember, when you've got your local area network and you're connecting everybody, you have to get out of town and reach the World Wide Web. And that kind of connectivity to reach that internet exchange point is going to be probably a middle mile network. So we want to make certain that if your goal, say a state or a region, says what's our best plan going forward to maximize connectivity, sometimes a middle mile forward. The state of Kentucky has been doing that. A number of other states provide middle mile services, and that does make it quite a bit easier for local entities to connect to the World Wide Web. Last mile, the most popular because we all live in residential or multiple dwelling units, and we want connectivity at home. And that's become so much more important to each of us individually and for economic development strategies. You know, before COVID, there was certainly a general trend towards increasing telecommunications abilities for those who had jobs that was perfect for. With COVID, that has just skyrocketed. There are cities that used to be just filled on their sidewalks, Midtown Manhattan, for example. And at the moment, even though offices are supposedly open, Midtown Manhattan's pretty empty. So we want to make certain that when we're doing a residential network, we make certain that we're going to take care of the telecommuting needs of people in those residents. And that means that some of that the network's going to probably want to be scalable so that it can scale up. If people are doing big data sets, big map sets at their home as part of work, we want to make sure that that network satisfies those needs, both for the individual and of course for economic development. Interconnection. So links to numerous telecommunication networks to exchange end user traffic is important. And a connection of two networks at a designated point provides access to a variety of end users and customers. That's also going to be a part of your business planning. Open access networks. Well, sometimes people have problems because they think open access networks bring a lot of contention. Open access networks, as you probably know, mean that you've constructed a network and any ISP can come onto your network. Now, there could be a cost to come onto the network. There could be revenue sharing once they're on your network. But what it does bring is it brings competition within one network. Imagine this. So you're in a locale and you say, well, we want to make certain, we have good competition. And how are you going to do that? Well, two ideal situations. One is you say, okay, everybody come in, everybody build your own network. Well, that's going to get pretty expensive. And you're probably not going to have too many people wanting to build networks over time. Not called competition, that's called overbuilding. In an open access scenario, you've built a big pipe and everybody can get on it, and people choose who provides their actual internet service. And there are a number of public entities that have open access networks now. I'm going to talk about a little bit of those coming up. Next slide, please. Yes, the infographic slide. Well, so this is a model slide that shows different types of deployment of broadband systems. So on the slide is an existing coax cable deployment, and that's part of a hybrid fiber coax build. And remember what those are. Cable systems are often legacy systems. Many of them were initially constructed decades ago. Most have been at least upgraded, many rebuilt. A lot of them are still hybrid. So there's coax going into your home, but increasingly they're bringing fiber plant into your neighborhood through a node. That creates better situations for connectivity, certainly lower latency, but increasingly companies are finding that fiber to the premise is both economically feasible for them and provides very good service and actually lower maintenance costs. So we want to talk about some of that. Middle mile portion of the network. Here's we have a school serving as an area node, and that's going to be branching into a buried fiber deployment and aerial development. Finally, there's a microwave deployment. Now, sometimes that's going to be a little too costly for the community's neighborhoods, but it could well be a very good fit for deployment to a business, public safety. And that's especially true with some difficult terrain. We've got a good example of a good use of microwave technology. Navajo Nation, they're a utility group as part of the BTOP effort several years ago, developed a microwave network. I believe they put in something close to 60 towers. They had a fiber middle mile to connect those towers to the internet. That proved to be really effective and really efficient because the territory was extremely remote. And that was a great use of fiber, of microwave technology. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is really three kinds of really generic networks. There are a number of statewide networks, at least an education network. Those are connected to nationwide education networks. And many states have a network that's not just for educational institutions, but connects local governments to the state government. Those are very interesting networks. They're very helpful because in many senses, they're middle mile. Some of those networks are in states where it's more difficult for local governments to hang on to, get onto. And that's because of the way the state laws are written about how localities can enter the telecommunication market. Interconnected regional networks, well, those are wonderful as well. Because remember, in essence, all networks are eventually connected, not directly, but they're connected through internet exchange points, or they're connected through peering relationships with other providers. And then we have local independent networks. And a local independent network is still connected to the internet, right? They're still connected to the core of the internet, but they're independently owned. They're not connected through a set of franchises in a region, something along those lines. Next slide, please. Great, time to do some research. So we started off by saying, let's not assume we know what's going to happen. That's generally not a great way to approach a business plan. You know, it's nice to have a good vision, as we talked about in planning, but we want that vision to be refined as we go through the planning process. And the final refinement of that vision is to make the business plan work for the vision, or to have that vision match up with what's possible to be done in a business plan. So we have a couple of things we want to look at first: demographic information, age, education, employment, income groupings. Secondly, and even more importantly, in my view, is housing trends. Are there going to be new developments throughout the county? Is there going to be infill? That is developments that are going to be filling in between two already existing communities. Are there going to be multiple dwelling units on your network? If so, you know, that's a different set of internal wiring needs. Are there going to be MDUs in the future? That's why, remember, as part of the planning process, we wanted to reach out to county and local officials where are development plans heading? Because we want to know, before we build the network, where new developments are going to be, whether they're residential, MDUs, industrial parks. We want to know what the plan is going forward, so the network can take advantage of those potential customers, and also so the connectivities for economic development going forward. Employment, let's get a feel for occupational employment, home price directions, and locations of business parks, and any revitalization plans that have been put forward by economic development groups. Importantly, we want to see how many folks are teleworking from home. That's increasingly important. So that's going to be a part of your research as well. And then what kind of resources do we have to bring to bear? Do we have government or partner-owned assets, for example? Does the local government have its own inward-looking network? That's that institutional network we talked of before. And was that INET designed to be expanded into residential areas? And how easy would that be to do? Similarly, does the government need to replace T1 lines? A lot of governments are still leasing T1 lines, and they're very expensive. And oftentimes, a fiber network can replace those T1 lines, and the cost savings over time pays for the network itself. I've had experience with that in two places I worked as a consultant the last few years. Next, broadband personnel expertise. We want to make certain we have that as part of our business plan. Now that can involve hiring staff. So you'll need to know what different positions in a broadband provider workforce are and how much they cost. Because to get good people to work your network, you're going to have to make the salaries competitive with the rest of the network, given where you are. So those are important ideas when you're developing a business plan. We'll talk about that in more detail. And then potential community uses. So of course we have e-commerce, we have education, health opportunities. For example, has the local government created a TIF district, a tax increment finance district? That's a public financing method. It could be used as a subsidy for infrastructure based on increasing property values. That's an interesting approach. It's been tried in several communities, mostly successful, I would say, as far as I can tell. Is there a business improvement district? That is, the business pays an additional tax or levy in order to fund projects within that district's boundaries. And again, broadband is vital to those kinds of districts. Markets. Are there gaps in the current service offerings? Are there barriers to entry? So the industry economics talks about barriers to entry. In broadband, the provider community historically and at the moment still views barriers to entry as being primarily government regulations. So I think that there are some government regulations that could be, if not a barrier to entry, certainly not promoting additional entry, but mainly providers do not like to compete against each other. And we all know that. And I've never met or worked with any community, and I've worked with many, who stopped a provider from coming into their community to provide service. So the barriers to entry, we want to think about that in a partnership. Maybe we could do one-stop permitting, timeframes set in stone on access to the rights of way. Things such as that can be helpful to providers coming into your community or expanding their network in your community itself. And then importantly, and remember, we talked about this when we were doing our asset inventories, and that is, are there other infrastructure projects going on in the geographic area you're thinking of having the network in that can lower the cost? Big example of that, and the major example of that for horizontal assets is, are there any street construction projects underway? Because as soon as that is occurring, it's an opportunity to, at a minimum, put in conduit. Because once the conduit is in, pulling or blowing fiber through is remarkably easy and relatively inexpensive. Because the major cost of underground construction is going underground. So if it's already dug, that's very good. And I believe the Idaho Department of Commerce has a dig once policy. I don't know that much about it, but I'm pretty sure that they have a dig once policy. And that's particularly helpful for state highway systems. Okay, planned street resurfacing, all of those things we want to correlate with our build, because the build is going to be part of our business plan in terms of expenses and capital costs. Next slide, please. Okay, well, here we are. We can identify our potential users. So residents of a defined community or location. Are these going to be home businesses, which are going to require a different level of service, a higher level? Multiple family residences, MDUs. Locations in particular. You want to look at business license data by industry code. That's manufacturing, is it technology, media, banking, entertainment, incubators, what have you. We want to get all of those things on our GIS mapping, and we want to get those on as early as we can in the process. But now that we're developing our business plans in some detail, we want to go back and make certain we've got all of those different customers and clients and important stakeholders on that map, so we're knowing where we need to go. Similarly with institutions. And increasingly, and more interesting than some other issues, is the development of smart technologies called smart cities, generally speaking. NTIA has a fairly vibrant group working on smart cities with other cities. And that's just not something for cities and urban areas. The biggest development that's going to be happening in agriculture, in my opinion, is precision ag and smart ag. And those are going to require real-time downloads from sensors, and that's only going to be available with rural broadband. That's very important going forward for sure. What about health and water? Well, we've got the telemedicine. We also want to make certain that we're putting in smart sensors to water sources. And that's not just for flood control. Those sensors can also help monitor the quality of the water. And public Wi-Fi. I'm a proponent of public Wi-Fi. I find that when smaller communities put public Wi-Fi in their downtown area, that's a big help to get people to go back to that downtown area as opposed to driving an hour to a big mall. And I think in the area of COVID, that's become even clearer for people. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've talked about a number of these things already because I tend to talk with whatever happens to be a part of the slide and sometimes beyond the current slide. So we have the telemedicine issue, smart city or smart grid applications. You know, those are pretty complex and they're going to involve a lot of coordination across the community and its organizations and the businesses and government entities and the utilities. Remember, the estimates for the number of smart sensors that are going to be deployed in the economy over the next is in the tens and tens of billions. Those are tough numbers to get my head around, but those are all the estimates that are coming in from folks in that field. Again, we want to make certain we've got good business connections. And even if you choose only to connect institutions, the needs of a local government building versus a hospital versus a school or a community center, they're going to vary greatly in terms of what they need for capacity and speed, which is why the network is going to have to be scalable. That's not a tricky thing to do. It just has to be built into the design process. We want to fully understand the customer base for a project because that's going to shape our deployment efforts and it's going to shape buy-in to the system and it's going to shape revenue coming into the system. And revenue coming into any network is vitally important, as we all know. Next slide, please. Okay. Well, when we're looking at these market operational issues, first thing is industry trends. Have improvements to the existing network been made? So that's why when you reach out during the very initial stages of planning to your local providers, I guess, you know, cable companies certainly come to mind. There are other ISPs in the community as well. But let's just focus on the cable company folks for a moment. When we talk to them initially, we want to know, you know, hey, what's your plans for expanding your network? Are there any? We also want to know what modems they're using. The newer modems are better than the older ones, and have they been deployed yet? We'd like to know, has the system thought about needing an upgrade, which is changing out the electronic equipment, or is the system thinking about a rebuild, which is bringing fiber closer to the homes? Those are things we want to find out because those folks have assets already in the area. And if we can get them to expand, and if we can help them with a partnership, that's a great idea to do that. We want to look at nationwide trends as well. You know, what have similar communities to yours been doing to improve broadband? I always recommend clients I work with go and see some other local networks that are doing what you're trying to do. That is incredibly helpful and also exciting. And every community I've worked with that has some sort of a public-private partnership or public entity providing broadband, they are just happy to see that. You'll get a nice tour and you'll learn a lot as well. And it'll build up your confidence. Target your customers. Well, again, are we serving everybody in the community or are we really just serving some forms of the community? That is, are we looking at businesses, residents, smart cities? What are we doing? And then current and future demand. Again, going back to the demographic data you gathered, what is the growth trend of the area you're in, or is there no growth trend? And having no growth trend may be part of the reason why you need broadband connectivity. Without broadband connectivity, it's hard for communities to grow. It's hard for workforce development. So we want to make certain we know, is it growing? If it is growing, where? So we can build the network so that it goes to those areas. Also, since a lot of America is actually covered already with service providers, whether they're fiber to the home or DSL, nonetheless, we want to know what are the current service offerings in the market we're thinking about expanding in a partnership or building a new network or some sort of other public involvement. And remember, when you are going to compete against existing ISPs or cable operators, most do not just sit still while you're building a competing network. They often start to upgrade. They often start to have better customer service. Even sometimes just a threat, just a good feasibility study will start the cogs of local providers moving a bit faster. But we want to make sure we understand that. And the other thing about a competition market, having done some work on these things with municipal co-op feasibility studies, you know, sometimes when you do a survey and you're reaching out to residential folks and you're asking them, you know, what's your interest? You know, how satisfied are you? What's your interest in new types of services? Do you support another network coming in? And then eventually you get to a point where you've got a tree and branch question going, well, given this and that, would you sign up to the new network? And I've seen surveys with questions that go like this. If the service was better and cost less, would you sign up? Well, pretty much, yeah, wow, great. Is that a good number you reach for penetration? No, that's not a good number for penetration. That's a number that is based on a faulty survey question. So we're going to probably get into a little bit more about marketing and survey research in a moment. But that's just the clearest example at the moment I can of as to why one needs to be very careful about market research. Next slide, please. Step 3. I guess I should be going quicker, but maybe not. Anyways, determining future service offerings. We talked about that a bit. We want to base it on customer needs and economic development needs. I'm always promoting broadband in terms of economic development strategies because I just think they match so perfectly. And good broadband helps every other aspect of your economic development strategy going forward. Okay, let's just...
Let me jump in here, Don. I think this is very important to just sort of reiterate. Again, from a service provider perspective, you know, this identification of demand is very important because it allows the service provider to plan and forecast how they're going to make money, right? So the more information, again, that you can provide to the local service provider, or if you're enticing a new one to come in, that you really know your customer base, you know, the citizenry, the businesses, you know, the more information that you can provide regarding the makeup of that customer base will allow that service provider to start thinking in terms of business offerings and most notably making revenue, making money, and making the network profitable.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so pricing structures. There are a variety of models that people tend to think about. And these models are up here, which is cost-based. It has to be at least cost-based because you're really just picking up the cost and a relatively scaled back rate of return. You have value-based as well. And that's based on the value that customers perceive for the product and its features. those are highly dependent on good marketing, frankly. And there are a variety of different marketing approaches for broadband systems. And as you get farther into the ends of the planning stage, you'll be getting more detailed information on marketing efforts and marketing ideas in the community that work for that community. Penetration. So the penetration rate is one of the key to the entire business plan. And again, penetration rate is the percent of entities you pass that sign on to the system. You know, it's some systems are getting upwards of 80% penetration. A number of systems, of course, are significantly less than 80% penetration. And remember, the penetration figure generally is for everybody on the system, no matter what they're taking. So if you have somebody paying a very minimal amount, they count the same towards a penetration rate as some business taking a huge amount. So the penetration rate's important in general, but we want to make certain we're also breaking that penetration rate out by the type of customer. In most network builds, providers, it doesn't really matter what type of provider they are, what organizational structure, you often want to go for, quote, the low-hanging fruit. And by that, they mean a larger business that will pay them a significant amount of money for gig or plus gig service. And those are really great customers to have. And part of your planning effort, if you'll remember, is making certain that throughout that you're reaching out to the larger potential customers and they're getting to know you, you're going to get to know them, and you're keeping track of when their current contract expires so that you can be the new provider of services. So a lot of communities are looking to make certain that things are affordable. Affordability is an important part of the business structure and the business plan, because we want everybody that's possible to get on that network. So scalability, different levels of service, and making certain that those who are less fortunate in the community are able to get good broadband connectivity. And there's a variety of ways that that is done, but that's also going to be part of your business plan, because not everybody is going to be getting the same service from you. And on your pro formas, those are all going to have a separate row, a separate penetration rate, and a resulting separate revenue benefit. Next slide, please. Okay, step 4, we are getting there. Here we go. Organizational structures. Well, so we've talked about the organizational structures that are possible, and those run from private owned, private operated, private led, what most communities now have, a public-private partnership that is privately led, publicly supported, 100% publicly owned and funded. And in between, of course, we have nonprofits and co-ops, but we want to make certain that for each of those organizational structures, we have a project timeline that that organizational structure can deal with. Sometimes entities are not as agile moving plans forward as other organizational structures. So you want to understand, if you've got an organizational structure you like, you're fond of, the community says great, if it's not the most agile moving organization, plan for that in your timeline. You know, don't assume that an organizational structure that's not used to entrepreneurship is suddenly going to become entrepreneurial in its speed of motion. I guess that's possible to happen. I just don't think your planning should count on that kind of cultural change happening really quickly. Similarly, staff, logistical issues. Do you have human capital in the area that is actually likely to be able to fulfill skilled positions in the network? Or is that something you're going to have to bring in? Or is that something that your partner in the private sector already has and they're bringing that to the table? All of those things are going to affect your operational costs. And we want to be able to make determinations on which is best for the plan by getting information on all the possibilities for those different operational expenses, particularly for labor charges. That's very important. Similarly for financial, we're going to bring in our bond counsel, of course. We're going to be bringing in our risk management folks, and they're going to be working with us as we begin to think about funding this network, not just for the capital costs, but for working capital going forward. And we're going to get to a slide with that in just a moment. Next slide, please. Okay, so implementation strategies. The first one we're going to be looking at is to encourage the provider to extend the network and provide more service. So we've talked about this in brief when I said have a conversation with your local ISP and cable company, see what it is their plans are for that network, if they have any. Want them to expand the area that they're serving to areas that are unserved or underserved. And we want to encourage providers to increase their capacity. Those things take some time. And we want to make certain that the local providers who are talking to them, we want to talk to them about digital literacy, digital equity issues, see what their company's plans are. Most multiple system operators and service, which provides more or less affordable access to connect to the internet. One of the things you want to find out right away is, does your community know those services exist? Sometimes they're not well marketed. They're not particularly well advertised. So that could be a conversation you want to have up front with your local provider that's already there. Do we have a middle mile provider that's going to be in the area that the network can connect to if there's no network at the moment? Option two, lease lines. Are you going to be able to avoid construction costs by leasing lines from dark fiber? Dark fiber basically means you've got fiber strands in a trunk or a sub trunk, and they're not lit, so you light them. And that's a lot cheaper than building network yourself, at least for a certain relatively long period of time. But again, there's a control issue possibly. Because as soon as you're leasing lines, yes, you have control over those lease lines, but they're not your lines. And sometimes that becomes a contentious issue down the road. Option three, participate in a partnership that owns and operates the network. We've talked about partnerships in some detail in the past. We don't need to go through all that today, but we want to make certain that we remember what the division of risks are, the division of costs, the division of revenue, the division of maintenance, the division of marketing. And remember, all that's going to be memorialized in a contract. And that contract will be important when you're developing the details of your business plan. Next slide, please. Okay, financial information. When we were putting together our planning team, we wanted a variety of skill sets. And one of the skill sets we wanted were business people, folks who knew how to put together a business plan. And by a business plan, we're talking about pro forma financial statements, projections. We're talking about detailed costs and expenses with assumptions backing those up. We want to talk about financial flows. We want to talk about the contributions of any partners for resources, assets, expertise. How are we going to be valuing in-kind contributions to the network? And then what are the potential cost savings for the network? And I bring up the cost savings because I worked on projects where there had been an institutional network which was part of a cable franchise agreement. But as state laws changed, those local franchises were no longer able to be negotiated. The state took over franchising. And as such, when the franchise was up, so was that internet, so was the iNet. And in the cases I'm familiar with and worked on, it became a better business plan to build your own fiber optic internet than continue to pay year after year for lit services from another organization. That's not always true, but it's often true, and certainly something that should be investigated by your IT department and your budget folks when you have an actual chance for that. So we wanted a good income statement, statement of cash flows, balance sheets, and a good analysis of all of that information. We're going to talk about some of that coming up. Next slide.
Don, let me jump in here too, because I think this is another important to make. You can keep it on this one. This is why when we talk about having the right partners and bringing the right partners to the table, you absolutely have to have someone who understands financial analyses and forecasts and budgets and all of that, because that's the language that many service providers, that's the language they speak, particularly as it relates to revenue and costs and forecasting. So whether you decide to do it on your own or you're working in partnership with a service provider, it is very important. It's vitally important that you have someone on your team that understands financial analysis. Now, many communities bring in a consultant for that, so it doesn't, if you can access and tap into that knowledge, skill, and ability in the community through some of your Chamber of Commerce or some of the business people, great. If you have that in-house already, great. But again, it is very important that you are able to understand and communicate in the budget and financial language that the service providers also understand. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. So this current slide which we're on, we're going to want to really talk in detail about putting together pro forma statements. I want to first indicate that it is more than possible to have this be fun, because what you're doing is essentially creating spreadsheets shows a variety of scenarios for the network, and we want to make certain that first we acknowledge that all of these pro formas are driven by the assumptions. So when we're getting to the point of really putting together these pro forma statements, which are going to be a part of your package for funding opportunities, we want to make sure that those assumptions have been varied and have been tested against varying other assumptions that are part of your spreadsheet. I have seen consultant studies which generally looking good. You get to this part and their assumptions are all in one direction, which is towards optimism. Nothing wrong with optimism, as long as another part of the study has looked at a combination of assumptions that are less robust. So you want to not only vary the penetration rate, you want to vary the interest rate, you want to vary the construction cost. If the construction comes in under budget, everybody's happy. I haven't seen a lot of that. If the project comes in over what you've allocated and signed on for funding, that's a problem. So I always think it's best to add in not just money for the construction cost overage, but also a significant amount for working capital. We're going to get to a slide that talks about that in a moment. We also want to look at what the inflation rate is assumed to be, because that's going to impact particularly your labor charges. We want to make certain that you've got, good O&E costs for operation of plant, administration, and maintenance. And part of that can be, frankly, insurance policies. Insurance policies for your equipment, insurance policies for your lines. What is going to be the cost of retirement and healthcare if you have employees? All of these things are going to be part of your pro formas going forward. And remember, if the result turns out better than your projections, everybody's happy. If the results turn out significantly below your projections, no one's happy. So we don't want to be too overly optimistic. Similarly, we don't want to be too pessimistic. It's kind of a goal thing, but you want to make sure you're varying them all and varying them all at once. And those are called sensitivity analyses. And people in the business will know how to do that. Outcome analyses. So, we have the, one that I think everybody understands, which is the internal rate of return. That's cost savings can be added in. Community achievements. What revenue do we have to cover fixed and variable costs? And we also want to be able to calculate the net present value. Sometimes people go, well, what's the net present value? Why do we need to calculate that? Well, because it's a very important determinant of picking a project, because net present value is just the difference between the present value of cash inflows and the present value of cash outflows over a period of time. And that accounts for the cost of money. So the NPV is used in capital budgeting and investment planning, and that analyzes the profitability of the projected investment or project. And that also can be done in comparison to another use of the same money doing something else. So a consultant or a business person on your planning committee will be able to do that on a spreadsheet. Formulas are already in macro usually, so it should be fairly straightforward. Next slide, please. I say that, maybe it's not. Next slide. Okay. Counting up the money. Great. Revenue and cost sharing. Important. We want to make certain, again, we talk about sustainable networks. Those are networks that have a positive cash flow. And it doesn't really matter what kind of organization is running the network. A nonprofit has to have a positive cash flow. Not-for-profit has to have a positive cash flow. Everything has to have a positive cash flow. And a lot of that difference is the accounting principles that operate for each one of those types of organizational structures. Anyways, we want to make certain that we show that the plan is long-term sustainable. When you're funding, when you're applying for grants, applying for loans, whether public sector, private sector, trying to attract private equity, they are going to want to know that over the long term, it's sustainable, not just the first few years, not the middle years, for a longer time. So we want to make certain we can do that. Want to make some variations when we're doing our planning on how many people take what level of service. There are pretty good metrics out there from the experience of, so those are good to use in addition to the research you've already done in this particular community. But we also want to be able to vary those because they're not going to be exact. No matter how good your research is, it'll be different than your numbers indicate in the survey or from other communities. So we want to vary those to make certain we're accounting for those possible differences and the network is still sustainable over time. We've talked a little bit about some of the operational costs and what can be contracted out, farmed out, subbed out. Often those things will be cheaper than hiring staff. Again,
let me add something here too as well.
Yeah, let me finish this up. So if part of your economic development strategy is building local staff skill sets, maybe think twice about the benefits of farming things out, because that could be part of your workforce development plan. Scott, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so our experience has been, we spend a lot of time, planning for infrastructure build and making sure we get infrastructure expansion to our vulnerable communities. And there is a lot of money, government money, philanthropic money, private equity money, state money, that will help build the network. But if you don't have your sustainability evaluation or your sustainability principles in mind from the beginning, once that money, once that working capital, that capital expenditure money is done, is used up, that's when sustainability becomes into play. And we'll touch on that in a couple of slides. But particularly when you're dealing with a local provider or private provider, again, the checkbox there on the left, the return on investment is really key. That's the business model making the case, right? Mitigation plans to shift risk is oftentimes another key consideration. Many of private providers, seek to shift risk onto, the public entity that they're partnering with, or at least obfuscate risk so they don't take all of that risk on. And then planning for, operations and maintaining the network, even though there's a lot of government money or private equity money that goes up to front to build it, there still has to be funds to operate and maintain the network if something were to happen. Line is cut, storm comes through. So you have to also build in that framework, operation and maintenance expenses. A lot of government money, they don't go for operation and maintenance. They go to build and establish, implement, and construct, not for ongoing operational and business expenses. So I just wanted to add that caveat. Back to you, Don.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. Well, Scott's absolutely right. Program that funds operational expenses for broadband networks. And I have talked to some ISPs, particularly out west and in very sparsely populated areas. They think that even with 85% capital financing and grants, they would still need operational support. And I just don't frankly see that coming particularly soon, but maybe. So the next slides we have, next one, please. Thank you. Great. So we now have 4 handy business model overviews. Those are strategy. Let's make certain we have our microphones off, hey? Who's 208? I think you're on the phone there.
The jowls, it's all delicious. So everything you get.
Well done. So we have these various business model overviews, and we've put them in strategy, marketing, sales, financial modeling, and your operating plan. And we're going to be talking about each one of those in the next several slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked a bit about marketing. I think that your marketing plan is very important for your business plan and for the success of your network and to make your stakeholders happy. A lot of times when we think about marketing, we're thinking of it in negative ways, selling us things we don't want, hiding prices. But real good marketing for these networks is just lovely, because every time you market a strategy for channel sell, pricing, promotion. Part of the marketing ethos you want to bring is, how can I market this so that people get onto the network and I satisfy the community's needs by getting them onto the network with my different marketing and sales approaches. And that's a positive way to think about marketing, because it is not true that build it, they will come works all the time. So if it does work that way, terrific. If we build it and only some, so we want to focus on our marketing effort with an eye that we're satisfying our stakeholders through that marketing effort. Next slide, please. Well, Scott, did you just put up a note that you'd like to come aboard?
Yes, this is where we were planning to hand off. So
thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll take it from here. Folks, we just have a few minutes, so we thank you for your patience. These slides will be used just, for reference. They'll be in the packet for you. Just shows some sample business model overview on strategy, marketing, financial modeling, and operating plan. And I want to go to the next slide, please. So this is the one I want to spend just a little bit of time on. It's very important. I think it reiterates what we talked about previously. For many operations, network operations, whether you're constructing a new one or expanding new operations, whether it's for that new operating segment or particularly for a new constructed project, there's the first several years that most networks operate at a loss. And so we need to be able to understand that, particularly for sustainability purposes, but also as you're working with a local service provider or a local partner, a private partner. So you need to understand that. So what we recommend when you're working with your private provider is understand that there's some point in the future, we call that break-even point X, some year in the future where that project begins to a positive net return or profit, right? Where the revenue exceeds the expenses. But there's a significant amount of time on the front end where it's losing money. The costs exceed the revenue that's coming in. So we need to understand that and understand that why when we particularly talking about expanding broadband in rural areas, there's been such reluctance on private providers to do that because they really haven't figured out a business case to be able to make money. And let's be upfront and honest about that. So we have this graph here shows, again, upfront capital. That's the cost that it takes to generally build the project, to establish, to do construction, to hire the people to start it, to expand it. Working capital after it's built, you need operation and maintenance. All of those, cost exceeds the revenue. And then again, at some point X year, those revenues exceed the expenses as those expenses again begin to level out. They never go away, they never go to zero, but the revenue then increases. And so when you're working with your private provider, understand they are exclusively looking at that. When do we start to make money? When is there a positive return on this investment? So we need to definitely figure that out. If you're doing it on your own, municipal ownership or some other model where the jurisdiction has most of the cost or the burden, it's that break-even point. It's that point where the cost and the revenue cover each other, and now we're at a break-even point, and we don't have to go to additional revenues, tax revenues, or revenues from your constituency to cover that. That's generally a budget issue that's very contentious every year, both on the local and state level. So very important that you understand that. Next slide, please. This is just the operating plan. Again, just shows you some basic elements of the operating plan. Again, these slides here are here for your reference. You'll have access to this when we email out the slides. Next slide, please. Next one. We're almost through. So generally, this is a summation slide. It's generally about the business case. So the purpose of today's session is just to reiterate to you, it's about the business case. Yes, we want to, target vulnerable communities. Yes, there should be an infrastructure strategy to expand. Yes, there's a companion strategy for digital inclusion to ensure, access, equity, and adoption by my vulnerable communities. We want all of that. But at the end of the day, it's a network and it's got to make money. And so it's all about the business case. So as we talked about in this series, we spent a lot of time on planning, a lot of the activities that you do up front. We also talk about making the case, right? That business case, uses of all the information that you gather during the planning phase. That helps you develop that strategy and financial model for the project, right? And then evaluating those partnerships. What do they bring to the table? Why is this strategic? Why do we want to bring in this partner? What skills, knowledge, and abilities, does this partner bring? And those important roles, again, are financing, network deployment, operating the network and maintaining the network. So again, this just summarizes it, in one slide for you. Next slide, please. So again, our theme is regardless of what model that you choose, these partners play important roles, right? So the government partners, they provide leadership and catalysts, right? Many of you are working with your local governments or working with your state governments, right? They serve as the leader and catalyst to garner community support, identify those needs, develop innovative solutions, either state funds or tapping into federal government partnerships, or even attracting a plan for financial private investment that many states are now doing in conjunction with the private sector. So what does the private sector bring, right? Ingenuity and generally money and funding, right? They bring the knowledge, the skill, the ability, but also funds. So again, understanding how to work with the private provider in a partnership role is very important. And then equally as important is the community, right? The people who are represented on these webinars, right? Your outreach and demand, these community anchor institutions, nonprofit groups, research, education, and government networks, of which there are both that operate in both Louisiana and Idaho. These drive that initial demand and promote capacity building in the long run. So regardless of the model, the partnership aspect, your stakeholder outreach, your planning efforts, your strategic planning, all of that plays a very important role. So I just want to thank everyone for their time today. You can go to, I think, the final slide.
Scott, I just want to say something on relative to that previous slide, just for a quick moment. My understanding is in Idaho, there is a Senate bill out there, 1149. I haven't had an opportunity to read it. I just found out about it yesterday, frankly. And it appears to be directed towards further increasing what local governments in Idaho can do in the telecommunications area. So if your community is, thinking about doing something, get a hold of this Senate bill and read it and see if that is going to be helpful. And if it is, good news. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Absolutely. Thank you, Don. And then finally, if you can go to the next slide. We won't go over those here because we're almost out of time, but we have supplemental slides. If you can just cycle through these, we've included some samples, some case studies, if you will, of networks and business model overview examples, whether it's privately led. Next slide, please. We have a case study on that with the main fiber company. Just some hits that will let you see, exactly, what they did, what was their model, how did they collaborate, who are their strategic partners, and then some type of funding mechanism. Most of these involved some type of funding mechanism, either with the state or NTIA. Again, we highlight the community's role and we highlight sort of the strategic, operational and strategic forces behind what was accomplished. So this will be in the packet. If you have any questions, please let us know. I know we have some questions in the chat, but I want to thank you all for bearing with us. We know it's dense subject matter. I know it's your head is spinning like, what? After all of that, now we got to think about detailed financial pro formas and all of that. But again, this is for reference only. You know, Don and I are here. You have resources, obviously CETA and PAC in Idaho, Delta Interfaith, you have resources in Louisiana. So again, we're here to help. And again, anything that we can do, please let us know. So we will open it back up for questions. I will turn it back to our host and moderator, Angie and Dorian. So thank you very much.
And remember, you know, at the beginning, I did mention that putting together these detailed financial plans and pro forma was going to be fun. It can be fun, from my point of view.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Scott and Don. And there are a couple questions in the chat already, and I'm betting there are more out there. But since you brought it up, I think that Christina Culver with Imagine Idaho is still on the call. And Christina, do you want to give us a really quick overview of Senate Bill 1149 on municipal authority for infrastructure and kind of where that's at and how we can maybe help support and revitalize that?
Sure thing. Thanks for asking. I'm glad I stayed on to the bitter end. This was really helpful and such a great presentation. I hope we can get to share this with more Idahoans. Even though you have 42 representatives on here, this is excellent. So SB 1149 is the bill that has been pushed by a coalition of leaders throughout the state that include the cities, the counties, the Hospital Association, and Idaho Chamber Alliance, and a lot of organizations and individuals who have come to the table to back this proposal. It has a couple of key elements in it. One is, I'm happy to actually put on my video. No idea what this morning looks like. Hey, good morning. So there's a couple of key components. One is that local units of government have authority to build and own their own broadband infrastructure. The focus of that, at which you've been talking about all day, is really to ensure those communities that where ILECs and ISPs cannot or will not serve communities, particularly those of under 10,000 in population. Many of our communities are even under 1,000 in population. We believe that it's an impetus, just like Ron really said really well, is that to get the wheels moving. So you have authority to drive the process instead of waiting for someone to come and work with you. Second of all, it's authority to go and to apply directly for federal resources, or whether it's out of future COVID relief money, stimulus money, but there's enormous amount of resources coming to the state through the COVID relief bill that was passed this week. Some of us call it COVID-5. It has a bunch, it's American Rescue Act. There is going to be a lot of money coming directly to towns under 50,000, which Association of Idaho Cities is working on clarifying the details, the time frame, but their broadband is an allowable use on that. Ultimately, our goal is to make sure you have the ability to apply for those resources and drive that financial package that has been so well built out by NTIA this morning. Then we also are looking at ensuring that there's a priority for open access projects. And of course, that means, you know, if you own it, that you keep it open. Our whole idea is that it's really about building the infrastructure and allowing a free market for carriers to come and provide that service. So that is what is in the package. You know, we are getting a lot of pressure against the major carriers, the ones that probably would not come to your community anyway, which is a little bit of a challenge right now. A lot of the carriers in the state, there's about 140 listed on Broadband now. There's about 30 to 40 at least who are Idaho-owned businesses and operating cable providers, as well as regional ones in Utah and Wyoming and Montana and Oregon and other states who want to do business in Idaho. So our goal is to make it as fluid as possible for public-private partnerships. so that you have the types of partners to build that. I loved that map that showed the different components, whether it's the fiber, the towers, the Wi-Fi, the coaxial cable, all of that is a combination of vendors. And our hope is that our biggest piece is that there are going to be a number of people who are going to support that. So the bill is not where we'd like it to be right now, but our goal is to get there. And like I said, enormous resources are being assigned to states through COVID relief. So you are going to have a project regardless. It's just dependent on how much authority you have to build to the home, I think is what is going to be happening. And we're happy to continue this conversation in the future. Thanks for the time.
Fantastic. Thank you for that overview. Let's see, Eric, I see you're ready to chime in here.
Angie, happy Thursday, everybody. I've been listening in, and again, thanks. Huge thanks to NTIA for all your support. It's been great. I just wanted to add, I was hearing, got some information this morning, just to kind of build off what Christina was mentioning about the latest round of COVID relief. There's some interesting things in there as it regards to regards to broadband. One is some money through the FCC that's going to be for education in library facilities. So some of the cool things that there's looks like there's going to be through the FCC, through E-rate, $7.2 billion in emergency connectivity funds. So what's going to happen is that funds are going to be going to schools and libraries. So to kind of help connect, right now it's looking at like it could be like faculty, staff, students, library patrons who do not currently have access to broadband or devices to connect should be able to kind of work with their local entities to get reimbursed for those things. So there's some cool, I think, again, building off the work that Idaho has already done this past fall with the Bridging the Digital Divide Task Force and the Strong Families, Strong Students initiatives where we use CARES funding to kind of help bridge that digital divide. There's going to be more on the federal side, especially activity to kind of help bridge some of these. So I think there's some really encouraging things that are happening, and I'll make sure to send out more information as we learn. So just wanted to kind of share that. It's pretty exciting.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely keep us updated as you learn more about what's coming out of that. That'll be great to see. And then I think I'm going to throw it all the way back to Andrew with West Central Mountains. And I'm not sure if he's still on the call, but Andrew had a question for Dawn about resources for local take rate evaluation. Oh, it looks like
do you have any samples? Could you provide any samples for some local take rate survey evaluations?
You mean instruments, survey instruments? The question?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Well,
we have to check if we have some in our our vast repertoire.
Yeah. So here's my answer to that question. There are a number of survey instruments that are online because governments have conducted them, and because of that, the questions are online. What I've been doing with communities the last few years, no longer a consultant per se, is if you have surveys that you've drafted, whether they are for the business community or residential, we're happy to look at them and give you our evaluations. I conducted an awful lot of surveys over time. I also think it's really important to have a conversation about the methodology of doing these surveys. To give you the clearest example, conducting random phone surveys is incredibly expensive these days. A variety of reasons for them. The two main ones are we now have phones that identify who the other end calling. So that eliminates a lot of responses. And the second one is we all have cell phones. In my family, my 3 children have cell phones where the area code bears no relationship to where they live. So that used to be another way to get a sample. Those things are more difficult now. So most professional survey companies now are doing things both by paper and computer. There are some issues about generalizability because of those are not necessarily random. But yeah, if you have examples of surveys you're going to run, I'd be happy to look at them. There's a bunch online.
Fantastic. And that's a great point about methodology too, and mixing it up a little bit so that we're actually getting the best response. Did we have any other questions for Scott and Dawn? All right. Well, as you're thinking of them, be sure and send them along. And we're definitely keeping Scott and Dawn's contact information after this, so that they will be hearing from us a lot. And we're happy to pass along additional questions. So our final opportunity for technical assistance and discussion is going to be on Thursday, March 25th. As always, so we're going to have our North Central Idaho regional discussion at 9 a.m., our North Idaho discussion immediately following at 10 a.m. You are welcome to join either or both. We've had some great participation and some great discussion about bringing these big topics down to the local level in these discussions. So we're looking forward to that. So please let Dorian or I know if you would like to be included in those. And then we have all of our wonderful Broadband USA contact information, and I'll just throw them out there as if you need help with planning a broadband training. They have been so immensely helpful to us. I would highly recommend you reach out to any of these wonderful experts. And it looks like, oh, it looks like, Dawn, we don't have your contact information on here. It looks like we have Amy's instead, but I'll be sure
I think I erased that on purpose, Angie. No, I'm just teasing. It is dwilliams@ntia.gov.
Fantastic.
And the phone number is 202-253-7604. And be happy to work with anybody in the Idaho community. I think, I just think that your two organizations have just done a fantastic job getting this all together and doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of setting up presentations. So thank you, appreciate that.
Definitely our pleasure. All right, so we are at the, what's next? We're at the end of our 6 series webinars. All of the webinars, including this one, are available online if you would like to rewatch them at any point. The slide decks are also available. For the past slide decks for the presentations, please feel free to just give myself or Dorian an email, and we're happy to share all of those. And we'll get today's recording and resources out probably today or tomorrow. We certainly want to thank everybody who has participated in all of these workshops, as well as all of our presenters. This has been such a great community effort, and we certainly see it being a community effort going forward. Evaluations. So we did touch a little bit here on our funding sources for this through USDA and through the Avista Novia Foundation. And both of those do actually ask us to use evaluations to evaluate what we can do better, where we might have done well, and how we're serving our community with these. So we'll be sending you a link to a survey to evaluate not only this specific workshop, but also the workshop series as a whole. And please let us know what you think and how we can improve in the future. And then I think the last thing that we just wanted to touch on is continuing the momentum here. And I think I speak for Sita and Pac when I say that we certainly don't want this to be the end of our discussions on broadband. This is just the beginning, and though we may not be meeting as a full group with Broadband USA any longer, we do want to continue the conversations at the state and the local level and the community level. So please reach out to us, and please look forward to hearing more from us as we plan out how that is going to continue for us. So
Angie, I have one more thing before we leave.
Absolutely.
I did put into the chat, we are doing a webinar on the NTIA's 3 new grant programs. I put a link in the chat to, we're doing a webinar on March 17th just to provide some information on that. So if you are interested in attending the webinar and hearing information about our tribal grant program, our Connecting Minority Communities grant program, or our broadband infrastructure program, please register for that webinar, and we'll do that on March 17th, next week, 2 p.m. Eastern.
Awesome. That will be a great one. All right, Christine, Dorian, or Nancy, any final thoughts?
I just want to say thank you again to everybody that's been involved with this. We could not have done this without you. We couldn't have done it without Broadband USA. We couldn't have done it without the folks from Rural Development, EDA, from all of our partners. Eric at the State Broadband Office, thank you so very much, and all of our participants.
Ditto. Good job covering everybody, Dorian. And let's not forget about the partnership with CETA.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.